Hello, folks. So, a couple of days ago, I went on X and I said I would make a video answering the top 10 questions by likes. Um, and it turns out that there were over 10 with over 5 likes. And so I'm just going through the list here. Hopefully, this will be interesting. I'm not going to make any guarantees. This isn't like very professionally made or lighted or anything. I haven't learned that stuff yet. But so we'll get into it. People ask a lot of questions about philosophy, some theology, some technology. So this is all, unsurprising. Thanks for all of that. You people seem to know me. And I let ChatGPT order the questions. So, with a banger to begin with and a banger to end with, or at least in its opinion. So I'm going to begin with Victor Jones, or Victor Jones X is the username. So here's the question. To you, does being Christian mean having a certain set of beliefs, which means bounded and concretized memory structures in one's mind, or does it mean to adopt Christ-like qualities? For example, surrendering one's sense of self-importance and a loosening of one's identity. Surely a loosening of one's identity is not required to be a Christian. I'll just begin with that. But let's talk a little bit about the nature of the question here. So the meaning of the word Christian is controversial. Like if you bring it up in social media, people are going to bark at the question a lot. And so, well, I'm going to do the same. It's controversial because this notion of a real Christian, right, means that you are more likely to be saved. If you're really a Christian, if you are in fact a Christian, if you're a genuine as opposed to a fake Christian, then you're more likely to be saved, right? So this then, the question of whether a person is really Christian or not, goes proxy to a certain extent for questions about soteriology or theories of salvation. So I'm not going to talk about that too much, but I'll say a few things. Originally, the word actually comes up just once or twice in the New Testament, meaning a follower of Christ. It was originally used as a term of abuse, I guess, an epithet. They're just these Christians. But then it was understood what it meant to say that you were a follower of Christ, because everyone at that time had, at least we Christians believe, a shared understanding of who Christ was. He was widely thought by his followers to be the Messiah. So if you followed him, you certainly believed that he was the Messiah, but there's more than that. I mean, you had a robust idea of what the Messiah was. That would be one of the first things that Jews would have told you, the Jewish converts, if you were a Gentile. And if you were a Jew, then of course you already understood who the Messiah would be. You had ideas, and that sort of situated your understanding of what it meant to be a follower of Christ, because to be a follower of Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one, meant that, well, this is the King of Israel, first of all. He was thought for a very long time, until Christians decided it maybe didn't mean this, that the Christ would emerge as a sort of warlord and take back Israel and thereafter the world, essentially, for the people of God. But again, because Jesus died at the hands of the Romans, to be a follower of Christ had a radically different notion if you understood him to be the king of Israel, and the idea that he rose into heaven to sit at the right hand of God. Again, that implies a very different notion of what it meant. So I go into all of this sort of historical detail in order to situate like the original core meaning of the term. Now the word's taken on a life of its own. We have to remind ourselves what it means to be, or what it takes to be a follower of Christ. So first of all, as originally, you certainly do have to have beliefs of a certain kind. If you don't, then you might be following some other being, right? Or maybe not at all, just one of your own invention. Your beliefs actually have to be true about Jesus. And if you have certain beliefs that are about some other entity, I don't really see how you can be called a Christian, because you might call yourself that, but you aren't following Christ. You must also have faith. So even the devils believed and trembled, as James put it in chapter 2, James chapter 2, toward the bottom. The idea then is you have to have faith. You actually have to be a loyal or a faithful follower of Christ, and not just a believer that Christ existed, or the believer that Christ was the Son of God. Because again, the demons believe that, but they're not Christians. And then to have faith is not to have faith in a set of propositions. It's to have faith in the person of Jesus. This involves never forsaking him, always being loyal to him. And since he's your king, that means really that you, as he said himself, make an effort to follow his law. He said, if you love me, keep my commandments. He said that. You can't ignore that. So if you make no effort to follow his law, how are you his follower at all? That's what I would say. There's so much more to say about this subject of like what is a Christian. I certainly don't believe that it is a matter of having a certain, doxastic state, as the philosophers would say, a certain set of beliefs, just admirably put in the question, bounded in concretized memory structures in your mind. No, you might want to look at my blog. Just search on my blog. There's a search form you can use for the post titled "The Denominational Distinctives." Part 1, there are 3 parts, so it's part 1, and it's question 4. I talk about all of this in great detail, not about the question of what Christianity is, but what saving faith is, which I would say, if you're a Christian, if you're a genuine Christian in the most robust sense, then you have saving faith in Christ. I think that's got to be one of the main requirements, if not the only absolutely necessary one. There's also a post you might look at called Brief Notes on the Gospel, which I kind of like myself. It's 25 or 30 paragraphs, very concisely states what the gospel is and what is meant by especially the word gospel. All right. Next question. Boy, it's going to take a long time to get through all of these if I'm going to go at this level of detail. Romaneum, or @37 Secrets Book, asks, what did Jesus mean when he said, call no man teacher? Call no man teacher. Now, you can't just think that he meant you shouldn't have any teachers, or there should be no pastors. That's a very simplistic reading. You have to understand the context. Part of the context, of course, is that there are teachers throughout the Bible, obviously. And Jesus was not repudiating their practice, that's for sure. So what did he mean? First of all, we should understand what was meant by being a teacher in those days. So both the Jews of that time as well as the Greeks and Romans, they formed schools. If you were famous enough, wise enough, you could attract paying students, and your adherents became representatives of you. And this was true of Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum. And then Paul attended a school of, what's his name? It'll come to me. Anyway, so the idea is that such people then would be, as it were, the sources, the touchstones of truth for their students. And again, the students would then become like representatives rather of a point of view. And so I think Jesus is saying, don't do that. All right. And I'm just going to read how Matthew 23 begins to put it into context. Then spake Jesus to the multitude and his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. In other words, they're now in the role that Moses originally had. All therefore, whatsoever they bid you observe, everything that they tell you to do, that observe and do. But do not ye after their works. In other words, don't behave the way that they behave. For they say and do not. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne. They're heavy, very painful to bear up under, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do for to be seen of men. In other words, they play the role of being in Moses' seat. They like to have the respect that people gave to Moses. They make broad their phylacteries, which contained little sayings from the Bible, enlarge the borders of their garments, and love the uppermost rooms at feasts, and chief seats in the synagogues, and greetings in the markets, and to be called of men Rabbi, Rabbi, which means teacher. But be not ye called Rabbi, for one is your master, even Christ. And when Jesus said this, his hearers did not, many of them anyway, did not understand him to be Christ, right? So the idea was, of all men, there's only one real master, and that is Christ. And that is because Christ speaks for God. They already believed that of the Christ who would be coming. And all ye are brethren, and call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father, which is in heaven. Neither be ye called masters, or teachers, in other words, that's what this means here. For one is your master, even Christ. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. Although sometimes master can also mean, the owner of a slave, or the boss of a servant. And whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. So the idea here is there is no school of individual Christians. Paul made a similar sort of point. It's like, don't call yourself a follower of Paul, or a follower of Apollos, right? You have only one teacher, and that is Jesus, is what he said. And so again, there's only one school. It's the school of God. And there's only one assembly, which is the church, right? That's what church means. So he did not mean that he was basically saying you need to be united in the sense of all being followers of God himself and his word, not dividing over personalities. I think that's what he meant. I could be wrong. I'm willing to learn more on this myself. So those are just a few thoughts, right? I'm not an expert on these things, but I have studied the text a bit. All right. But again, I'm not an expert. Benjamin asks, what is the proper role of government, if any? All right. So this is a hard question, obviously. Has many moving parts, much complexity, which a person can easily get wrong. And I haven't studied political philosophy in quite a while, actually. So I'm just going to go over a few basics, I guess. I would define the government as organized, institutionalized, and legitimized exercise of power. So the question then, if that's roughly correct as a definition of government, when is it ever legitimate for organized, institutionalized power to be wielded? Right? That kind of focuses the question. What is the proper role of government? Well, what is a government? Well, it's the organized, legitimized exercise of power. Okay, well, when is that ever legitimate, right? Well, first of all, I would say there are some necessary conditions. In order to be legitimate, there has to be some body of law which it, at least ostensibly, conforms to, and the government gets its legitimacy from that law. And here I don't mean natural law, I mean an actual positive or written down law. So it has to be defined by a well understood constitution. Best to be written down. Perhaps the English had a constitution for a good while. I don't know if they do anymore. All right. Second, generally I endorse the libertarian principle that it's wrong to initiate force or violence against another person, and thus we can state as another principle that the government is a response to the initiation of force. So for that reason, and this actually has a number of different consequences. So one of the things that the legitimacy of government means is that the response to force is legitimate. That's the thing that's actually legitimate, the idea that you can meet force with force. So they secure justice, governments secure justice, they keep the peace. They can also protect borders and prevent invasion. If there is no such feature in the government, then there's no guarantee that the law will be kept within the borders. That's actually we've seen lately. And I suppose all other legitimate functions flow from these principles. But if I were to spell that out, I'd be talking through a little, treatise of political philosophy, which I'm not prepared to do. So, all right, so that's that. Next question from Andy Kayala, A. Kayala. What is the relationship between family, church, and state? Then, how should we think about authority and lawful resistance? So I don't like this question very much, to be honest. I mean, I like all philosophical questions, but this is just a little too loose and is asking too many things. So I'm not going to speak very long about it. I'm not really sure I have very much interesting to say off the cuff. I would say that each of the institutions mentioned, family, church, and state, are very important. They each serve different and legitimate, I would say, functions. Each has a role to play in a healthy country. So the relationship between them, right? Well, the family has to observe the church. The church has to observe the state, and vice versa for all of these. In other words, they each must acknowledge the sphere of influence and legitimacy, and help protect those. So the state needs to actually protect the family. The state needs to protect the church and its independence of other institutions, other centers of power within society. This is essential to the very idea of a civil society. If everything is regarded as being part of the state, for example, well, that's the definition of totalitarianism, right? And one of the definitions or criteria of a really healthy polity is having a healthy civil society. And if you don't know what a civil society is, you should look it up. It's a very interesting topic. A lot of people use that term, but they don't actually know what it means. Or maybe ask an LLM to explain what civil society is. It isn't just having clubs, but that's sort of like the standard example. No, like, family is part of civil society. Church is like one of the leading parts of civil society. And it's like everything that is on top of, in addition to, government that organizes a society and makes it healthy. All right, as to how to think about authority, the question is simply too broad to answer briefly. You might as well ask, what's your political philosophy? And well, I've already gotten into that enough, so I'm not going to say any more there. But on the question of how should we think about lawful resistance? Well, let's just say that resistance against lawfully constituted government is generally not permitted, is it? Right? That's actually, fighting words and can lead to a death sentence if you do it too strenuously. You could talk back, but generally speaking, things have come to a serious pass if you're actually talking about like armed resistance against the government. I'm not in favor of that. Read about that in Romans 13. That actually would now shape my political philosophy to a certain extent. You can read what the Declaration of Independence has to say about it. That's pretty good. But then, in the American Revolution, the Americans were across the sea when it took weeks to get from one country to the other. And, the new country was vast. It's bigger than England. Even the 13 colonies were bigger than England. And the growing population was soon to be more numerous than England. It actually made some sense at the time for the colonies to break away, as colonies often did historically. So this is a different situation now, right? I am against war of all sorts, and things have to be very, very desperate before I would support them under any circumstance. All right, John, and I'm not gonna talk about the issue and what is the just war. When should we get into it? Much less when should we rebel? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll think about that some other time. All right, John Campbell, which has the username John Backbay, asks, what were the motivations behind the millions of man-hours put into creating Wikipedia? Should volunteer editors be compensated in any way for their motivations? So, this is well understood. I've talked about this many times before. The motivations of Wikipedians, first of all, narcissism. That is the number one, top of the line um, reason why people spent so many hours on Wikipedia. Close to the beginning, like in the first few months, it didn't really matter because there people I think did it just sort of like, wow, this is cool. Like it was like a fun game to play. But as soon as people started seeing their articles pop up on Google, then it got serious in a different way. People saw their own words being represented as what is known about topics. That's pretty interesting. The very idea that your words would represent what humanity takes itself to know. And now, because Wikipedia is so huge and influential, people will go to great lengths. I'm sure many of them are still motivated by narcissism. The idea that they could like impose their will over the rest of the Wikipedia community and then on the world, right? So not only do they have the bragging rights to say that, you know, I wrote the most of the words in this article, you know, on Wikipedia. If you read that, you're reading my words. It's not just that. On the articles that are politically important or scientifically important in research, etc., or that you know change people's buying habits and things like that. There's this massive opportunity for marketing and activism, which is how the left views Wikipedia. Now, I'm not saying that conservatives should do that and you know follow in the footsteps of the left, but I do think that the rest of the world, because the left is a very small portion of humanity. I'm talking about the radical left, the kind of people who edit Wikipedia in order to basically impose their will on the world. A tiny portion of the world, right? Other people have actually got to step up and you know, if they feel motivated, you will be doing your civic duty. That's another motivation, and some people, I think, actually do that. And more power to them, I say. I would also say that there's also a massive opportunity for learning the game, the Wikipedia game, well enough to be able to charge money for edits under the table. Which then leads to the question, should volunteer editors be compensated? Well, many of them aren't they? I don't know how many, but it's quite a few. Yeah, I really have no way of knowing. There is literally no way of knowing. I think somebody could do a really careful academic study and get a much better idea of what it is. But I don't know of such a study. It'd be fascinating, really. I'd like to read such a study. If they're compensated, though, they're no longer volunteers, are they? So, like, the question is, should volunteer editors be compensated in any way for the contributions? Well, then they're no longer volunteers, right? So then you might as well just say, okay, how can we pay the employees of our free encyclopedia? Well, maybe make the encyclopedia not free. Okay, well, whatever. All right, next question. Avila Beach. And the username is also Avila Beach. So here's the question. Given Wikipedia's reputation for censorship and dissemination, I think it means like dissemination of, you know, propaganda, would you say Wikipedia as it stands has been a net gain or a net loss for civilization? So, I mean, you could say, given Wikipedia's reputation for censorship and propaganda, fine. But if I'm being asked, is Wikipedia a net gain or a net loss? Let's take the question in its broadest sense then. So the big gains were it's actually given a lot of information to a lot of people. Is that good? Well, yeah, I guess so. It's pretty good that people have knowledge that they wouldn't otherwise have, because otherwise it would just take too long for them to find, or they wouldn't know how to find it. That seems possible. I think that without Wikipedia, other encyclopedias would have filled the gap in one way or another. Maybe someone else would have learned how to make a wiki encyclopedia, and that's very possible. I also think, and like I've talked to enough people in, who are giving me rides to the airport, that it's helped with literacy. Like they tell me, back in my country, people do use Wikipedia, and they I think a couple of them have independently told me that they've used Wikipedia and the rest of the internet to help them learn to read. And if you actually look at literacy rates since the 1990s, it's been shocking at how much more literate. I mean, when I was a kid, like the literacy rates of sub-Saharan Africa were like below 30%. They're like really, really small. And now they're like up over 50% most places. And in some places like, Nigeria and Kenya, I think they're up over 80%. And that's huge. I mean, that's basically they're getting civilized. Like Africa is getting civilized. I'm not saying Wikipedia is responsible for that. I think the internet generally is responsible for that. But insofar as Wikipedia is a source of a lot of the information, of the organized information online, I think it's done some good there, right? It's not just Africa either. Okay, but this brings us then to the losses, because especially in other places where there is better material readily available, the ease with which information has been found has made knowledge seem cheap. So on the one hand, we are rightly more skeptical when we approach information we find online, but on the other hand, in no small part due to, again, our lack of practice in coming to grips with really well-written, well-researched stuff. Because we're frankly attracted to info light. We like being able to get quick answers and then sharing our ready knowledge. If you actually have to work for what you know by reading a book, for example, then you actually will have a richer understanding. You'll be able to explain things more. You'll be able to remember it in greater depth and so forth. So I guess what I'm saying is, if Wikipedia didn't exist, perhaps we wouldn't be so addicted to info light, as I call it. So anyway, it might be a little early to say whether it's a net gain or loss. I mean, if you just like force me to say one way or another, I would probably say it's been a net loss. But it's a net loss that is shared with the rest of the internet. But I don't know. It's a hard question. And again, it might be a little early to tell. There is a relevant essay or two on this topic in my book, Essays on Free Knowledge. It's just a collection of my essays, not all of which are still online. So yeah, put out in 2020. Dale Cloudman asks, do you think a Grokipedia type encyclopedia is fully the future? Or will mostly human contributed encyclopedias have a place as well? So, right, I'm asked this question a lot by interviewers. And the standard answer is, well, the role of human encyclopedias going forward is human written encyclopedias are going to continue to be needed because they summarize what human beings take themselves to know. right? If there are no other kinds of encyclopedias, there are going to be encyclopedias written by experts for experts. So like these single volume, let me see if I can find one here. Here's a good example. Companion to Epistemology, one of my favorite books from the 1990s when I was a grad student and studying epistemology. So a well-worn book. A book like that, or the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, or its equivalents in all other fields, are necessary as sort of representations of what human beings take themselves to know in different fields. And no philosopher is going to judge what is really known in a field by, ChatGPT. I mean, of course not. I certainly wouldn't. Even if the answers sound pretty good, it's like, okay, well, enough messing around. I'm going to pick up this book and read what a professor has written on the subtopic, right? So it's the same way with everything. And that I think is true of a general encyclopedia. I think of a general encyclopedia as essentially a collection of all of these. And an LLM is never going to be good at representing what we take ourselves to know as a sort of snapshot or archive of the epistemic holdings of humanity. So we need to have human beings working on those. Then the role of Grokipedia, other LLM written encyclopedias, and LLMs generally will be to provide increasingly high quality answers to questions, right? Now, it's one thing to have an answer to a question. It's another thing to actually have knowledge. In order to have knowledge, it's not just a true belief, it's justified true belief. And one of the ways of understanding what that means is you have to understand the context, right? You have to understand the meanings of the words. More than that, you need to understand something about why people believe what they do, which requires that you understand something about the methodology of the field, et cetera, et cetera. You're not going to get that from, simple answers. So if you want to get knowledge, you're going to need to, you're not going to be able to use LLMs unless you're really, really probing them in a way that you would probe a book, frankly. And it's probably faster, and probably always will be faster to use books to learn something systematically. If you want to learn in a more haphazard way, a good LLM might actually still work. I've learned a lot from talking to LLMs, that's for sure. All right, enough of that. Do you believe, okay, this is some guy. That's what he calls himself. And the username is Xtelligence with a Z at the end. Do you believe there is an open and honest way to apply a reputation mechanism to contributors that would significantly increase the quality of those contributing to encyclopedias? Possibly. The devil's in the details. Here, I'm sure the person who wrote this has got some either idea or a project underway. The devil's in the details, right? Please see thesis 7 of my 9 theses. It's at the top of larrysangert.org. If you go to my blog, and the first big link at the top of the page is a link to the 9 theses. Thesis 7 then has some thoughts about this. It's hard to say, I would say, just off the cuff, how a good reputation would play out. in the context of a project like Wikipedia, right? I mean, first of all, the standard, you know, average Wikipedian today is not going to give somebody like me a good reputation. Have you thought of that? I mean, so what? It really depends on the community, right? Um, in other communities, I would have a great reputation, and vice versa. There's a lot of people who would have a stellar reputation on Wikipedia who would be basically ignored in other places, a lot of other places, frankly. All right, Anthony Vanson, um, at Anthony_Vanson. If you started fresh today, what 3 protocol level guarantees would make a knowledge platform neutral, forkable, and resistant to capture or corruption? So this is a very wonky sort of question, and I sort of have to explain this question to the people who are not inclined to understand it. So protocol is, it's basically, it's a very vague term. It's just a technical way of handling interactions. But for these purposes, I take it to mean something like a rule that defines an open network. So if computers talk to each other, or if people talk to each other, or other things, they talk to each other via a protocol. Diplomatic protocols are ways that diplomats talk to each other. So then the idea is, what protocol level guarantees, I think the person, Anthony, just means a rule. What rules defined in the protocols, or in other words, what protocols themselves would make a knowledge platform neutral, forkable, and resistant to capture? So if it's neutral, then that means that there is no way for it to be biased against any new entrant to the network, right? So if you want to join the network and you're a Nazi, you can go right ahead. Or, you know, if you're a communist, we're not going to stop you. All right. So forkable, that means that the content on the network then, while it might exist in some sort of well-agreed canonical form inside the network, if it's forkable, then you can take the information out of that network and start a new network, and with the same content if you want. And resistant to capture or corruption, that's actually very close to being neutral. So the idea is, if it's resistant to capture, then there are things about it that make it hard for somebody to just like buy the whole network, right? Or to, by getting influence over one node, they have control over the whole thing, right? So if it's resistant to capture, then it's much harder to corrupt. So all of this is like important, and we open source geeks love this sort of thing. And you know, I appreciate the question. 24 people upvoted this. So here are a few ideas. First of all, I have to say, if it were possible to start fresh today, that would mean Wikipedia wouldn't exist. Right? And that's a very different situation from the one we have. One of the really hard problems about starting a competitor of Wikipedia is that Wikipedia is so huge. It basically sucks the air out of every competitor that I have tried to make or support, or that others have tried to make over the last 24 years. So yeah, it's a problem. So that's a very different situation from the one that we have. All right, so here are some rules that would help secure a neutral, forkable, and incorruptible network. So first of all, users should own their own identities. Free tools should be made to support them. In other words, like for example, if I want to say I have an account in the encyclosphere, then I can actually register my account on my own computer, which I do. In fact, I have a DID protocol, digital ID, and I use it to sign my ZWI files, ZWI, zipped wiki files. So there are encyclopedia files. So I own my own identity there, right? And this means then that stuff that is signed with those identities becomes traceable to me. I can prove my ownership, and yet it can be shared across the network. Isn't that great? And no one can claim that it's theirs because I can prove it's mine, right? I can actually prove in a various complicated, hard to explain way, but I can prove that it's mine because like only my identity could have signed and come up with that particular signature. Right. So second, that leads us then to contributions are digitally signed. Though in this way, we can trace ownership, as I was saying, ensure content has not been tampered with. So we do this with ZWI files on the encyclosphere. And this is why the encyclosphere is built the way it is. And this means that, I mean, although I'll tell you this, like getting people to use a complicated new protocol like this is actually one of the hard asks. There haven't been very many people who have actually signed ZWI files independently. I think there have only been maybe 6 different people who have done that. Yeah. So I have, let's put it this way. If Wikipedia or Elon Musk, or both, or somebody else equally influential, so not me, were to get behind signing encyclopedia files, ZWI files, in this way, then perhaps a lot more people would be doing it, and then perhaps all of the encyclopedias in the world would be signing their own ZWI files and putting them out there under a common protocol, and then they could be exchanged in a network that is entirely independent of any one player. Wouldn't it be great? We've basically proven that that's possible. So my son manages. He's kind of smart. He's an engineering student at Ohio State now, and he's 19. And he actually made EncycloSearch. So if you go to encyclosearch.org, he made that when he was about 17. I mean, he did most of the programming there, although he continues to maintain it. And anyway, and then another guy is a PhD physicist who works for CERN, Dr. Sergei Chekhanov, and he's a friend, and so the two of them are capable of interchanging ZWI files. They have their own software that uses their own that signs the ZWI files. They don't like share the software, and so this proves essentially that it is a robust protocol. So yeah, I know this has been very, very hard for the non-techies to follow, but we had to get some of that stuff in, you know. Otherwise, I wouldn't be like, you know, it's fan service for geeks. All right, so here we go. Number 3, I would say we need rules identifying how to exchange data among multiple aggregators. This is something that actually I've been having to push and impose. I still think the guys don't quite have it. Basically, if you don't have rules that govern how data is exchanged across the network, and so that it arrives at both ends. It starts at one end and it arrives at the other end in a way that is expected, right? And it makes the transit intact and so forth. Um, if you can't do that, then you don't really have a network at all. And we do have that, but we don't have we haven't settled all of the protocols surrounding that. So anyway, that's important. A lot of cryptocurrency, a lot of crypto protocols, they don't even bother asking this question at all, right? I mean, sure, they say they've got an open protocol, but they've only got one server. All right, is the only way to prove that you've got a real protocol is if you've got a lot of different servers, preferably operating different software. In other words, if it's just one organization making the software that everybody has to use, it's still centralized. Okay, so no, you have to write at least two different versions of the software. It's like saying the blogosphere is independent of what is it called? Automatic, the author of WordPress. If all of the blogs were written with WordPress, no. If the only blogging software were WordPress, if you had to use WordPress, then the blogosphere would be an extension of Automatic. That's the name of the, with two T's there. That's it. Play on the name of the Matt Mullenweg, who started. I guess he started the WordPress. All right, boy, two more questions. Yeah, this is kind of long. Bill Heyman, hey man, asks, are you aware of any projects that are packaging historical, curated and edited, but out of copyright on Dead Tree encyclopedia articles? In other words, are you aware of any projects that are packaging historical encyclopedia articles into the ZWI format? So curated and edited. So just a second here. I want to just double check that I am still recording. I seem to be. Excellent. Okay. So it's funny that you should ask. If you proceed to Oldpedia, oldpedia.org, you'll see the work of myself and my son and a nice lady who is now one of the board members of the Knowledge Standards Foundation. And we don't have a whole lot of work to show for, but if you go there, you will see there are 3 of the 4 old encyclopedias there were made using software that I made. So historical collections of Ohio and musical biographies. Those are well-generated ZWI files. The other one, Concise Cyclopedia of Religious Knowledge, that is something that has got a lot of mistakes in it, but I tried to make a software package that went all the way from image-based PDFs, so they're not recognized text, but just image PDFs, to HTML files. And not just HTML files, but ZWI files. It's like I've got the whole workflow worked out. And it's 90% there. It's just like the last 10%, it's going to take months, I think. But it works pretty well. So you can look at the articles there on the Concise Cyclopedia of Religious Knowledge. I would be working on that full time even now, if I could. You know, if people want to fund that, like, let me at it. Um, or, maybe somebody can make the software better than I can. I've been working with, well, I mean, I've got some skills myself, but I've been working a lot with LLMs that make it the whole process faster. But I am convinced that one of the most important things to do in the world, Bill, is to um, get old books that are in PDF form that have not been properly rendered in HTML yet, because it's expensive if you want to do a lot of them. Like, with a $20 a month subscription, you can do something like, I don't know how many, maybe 20 books, something like that. Like a book a day or something like that. It's just not enough, right? If you want to do it at scale, then, and you want to like do the entire book collection in archive.org of the public domain books, I mean, then that would require millions of dollars, actually, I think. So we really need cheaper software, or we need a massive in-kind donation from OCR software companies. It's really important, I think. All right, finally, JPCEO 10, whatever. Oh, I see. It's JPCEO and then 11 for the username. He asks, Jesus aside, if someone could study just one historical figure and their works, who would you recommend? Well, that's an interesting question. It really depends on your purposes. Like I would say that if you're just talking about general education, then Plato, right? There's bang for your buck. There's nobody more important than Plato for just getting a good general education. It's not just in philosophy. He has been influential through philosophy on a lot of other stuff. So I would say, yeah, that's like this, the one most important. Aristotle would be a close second. For certain purposes, he might be more important. Oh, definitely would be more important. So just read a bunch of their works, I guess. Now, if you mean literature, novels, poetry, plays, obviously Shakespeare. I mean, obviously. Among the novelists, I'm highly partial to Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. I've read several novels of theirs, and they are justly famous for a reason. They're deep, they're important, and they're just really good stuff to read. Like, I didn't understand and appreciate Dostoevsky when I was young. Like, Tolstoy is easier to understand when you're young. Dostoevsky is more subtle and just more complicated and just requires more of an understanding of life. So like I reread The Idiot and The Brothers Karamazov a couple of years ago, and they were so great. I mean, I understood them so much better than when I read them when I was 20. And especially The Brothers Karamazov. It's like, yeah, this is a novel. It's like, it's gripping. It's interesting. But I could also understand, like, no way in hell could I understand this properly when I was trying to read it. So, and it wasn't because I didn't understand the words or because I didn't understand the concepts and I couldn't like look them up. It's just, it's the whole thing. It's like there's a lot there. And in order to really appreciate it, you have to know a lot about life, you see. So anyway, that's just about Dostoevsky. Dickens is, oh, I love Dickens. When I was like an Ayn Rand devotee, I looked at Dickens and I thought, oh, well, you know, he's this big fan of altruism and so forth. Now, as a Christian, I just love Dickens so much. Yes, he gets better with age also. And then another one that is hard to get into because he always begins his books boringly. I mean, really boringly, is Sir Walter Scott. I've read a half a dozen of Walter Scott's novels, and every time the first 50, even the first 100 pages, I'm sorry to say, they're just boring. Until, like, if you go back and read it later, you see why all of these tedious details actually ended up being important, right? Because after that, it just becomes, it's like these whole vistas of connections and like really philosophically interesting details, and the language is extremely rich. You know, he wrote in Scots, or at least his characters spoke Scots. So I'm on a war, I'm on a war, that sort of thing. All right. If you meet figures who can help save your soul, and not the Bible, then I would say, actually, I would say the Apostolic Fathers, but you're asking for a particular historical figure. And in that case, I would say Augustine and Aquinas, maybe Augustine more, because the combination of the Confessions and the City of God are like hard to beat. I'm about 2/3 of the way done with City of God. I like not getting through it as fast as I want to because there are other things that are getting in the way. But yeah, I really love it, and it's justly famous and influential. All right, folks. I hope that was interesting. That's very good. If you liked this, we might do it again if there are enough people who watch. I can't guarantee that, of course, but we'll see. All right, so long.